Hello, how are you? It's episode 140 of Grow Yourself Up. And today I wanted to share a little bit more about context in motherhood and some considerations around being the default parent, if you are the default parent, and some elements of polyvagal theory that I think you can use to help you all the time, actually, but that might be particularly helpful in this holiday period. This episode, so it's 140, and it'll be released in, what date? On the 15th of July. So kind of in the middle of the summer holidays for the US, and most of the UK will be on holiday later this week from school. And so for a lot of you, I know that means that there'll be more of a juggle, more pressure, more expectation, and sometimes things that we get told should be feeling joyful just feel like the absolute worst things in the whole wide world. So, and not to be negative in any way, but I really want to kind of support you in thinking about what supports you and also why things can be so tricky. So, one of the things about motherhood that is so discombobulating for many of us, and which we talk about as part of identity shifts, but I think a really fundamental thing is how our context shifts. So we go from being, let me share about my own context. I went from being first of all, I had worked in the city in financial services in London for many years, and I retrained as a psychotherapist. And I was working, seeing a lot of clients before I had my children. And I was commuting to various different places and seeing clients in different locations. And I had a kind of a life where I was very much in charge of things. If I think back to when I was in financial services, if I'd gone straight from financial services to motherhood, I think it would have been even more jarring. But there, I would get to work. Sometimes I would go to gym before work. So kind of commute really early to the gym. Often go swimming before work. I'd have breakfast at work. I could control my breakfast. I could sit and have it by myself. I could have a different thing every day, even if I wanted. I mean, this is talking about a lot of privilege, and I was working in a very sort of overworked industry. So that's sort of a second topic. And then lunch, I could go each day and have like a really lovely salad. I used to go to this place in Spitalfields Market called Chopped, and have I would always have like a whole selection of different leaves, brown rice, grated beetroot, grated carrots, all these wonderful things, like all these fresh vegetables, some sort of protein sauce. I think I actually used to have turkey often. And then I'd have olive oil and lemon juice. And that was so joyful and lovely. And as I'm telling you this, I'm like, oh my word. In addiction recovery, there's a term called euphoric recall. And when you're trying to get clean or sober, they urge you not to do this thing called euphoric recall, because euphoric recall is when you're like dreaming about how it used to be when you were drinking, or dreaming about how it used to be if you were doing drugs, and like how amazing it used to be. And I can hear that I've gone into euphoric recall just about having those lovely lunches where you get to choose and you haven't made it and you can afford to buy it, and all those things. Anyway, so our context for many of us is we've been working. We are like, really out in the world, living our lives out in the world in a kind of a public context. We have a lot of freedom in terms of socializing, and just in terms of everything, in terms of how we exercise, when we exercise, who we spend time with, what time do we go home? Do we go to gym straight after work? Do we go socializing? All of these different options. And when you become, often people, I observe in my own practice, people work incredibly hard in pregnancy because they're trying to get a lot of things finished, or maybe this is a time that they're kind of getting their house remodeled or doing things like that. So it's extremely intense time. And then there's a huge, huge context shift. And often that's framed in terms of the identity. But again, I think considering the kind of the context that you're operating in and how fundamentally it's changed, is really important in terms of understanding why it is so discombobulating, and how come we like many of us feel kind of tipped on our sides by that massive context shift. And context is one of the essential elements of polyvagal theory, like considering our context, considering how our context impacts us. So just a tiny brief recap that polyvagal is something from Stephen Porges. There's lots of different teachers who teach it in different ways. Deb Dana is one of the main kind of teachers of it. And she talks about how important context, choice, and connection are. And so I'm going to be focusing on those three things. And first of all, I'm going to focus in on context. So from a perspective of how your life changes, your context changes massively. Listen to what I just described about my typical day, about how there's so much freedom, choice, autonomy in that. And then when you have a baby and if you are the default parent, which if you are on maternity leave, in the UK, you can get up to a year of maternity leave. I know it's much shorter in the US. I think people take between 3 months or 6 months. And in other countries, I'm not entirely sure about any paid maternity leave that's kind of given to everybody. But your context changes massively. On a daily basis, the level of freedom that you have is massively removed, and you have very little choice about, where you're going to eat, how you're going to eat. Your day is totally driven by a small person and trying to get them to sleep and trying to get them to eat and all the various tasks around motherhood. So never mind any trauma that you've got, never mind any issues with your relationship, never mind any other things, never mind what a huge shift like matrescence is just by itself. The context and the way suddenly you're shipped from your life into this totally new life, that's really discombobulating. And the same thing applies in the holidays, because you have a measure of freedom. So in the school holidays, so what I mean is if your children attend school, then your context massively shifts in the holidays. And you may still be trying to do a paid job as well as a lot more additional unpaid labor in terms of being there for your children and arranging whatever it is you're going to arrange for your holidays. Or maybe you take time off work. I'm not sure how you arrange it, but it's really focusing on how the context shifts massively for you and noticing that and talking about that and trying to get an understanding of how you can support yourself in that context is really important. And it's really exacerbated if you're the default parent. So the default parent thing is another thing that adds a layer of complexity to the context in motherhood, the way that I conceptualize this, because we are always, as the default parent, and I'm the default parent in my relationship, in my household, I do more of the caregiving. And that is in line with my values. I want to do that. I am grateful that I can do that. And I still have some very mixed feelings sometimes about how my life feels very out of control sometimes because I don't control the context and because I'm constantly shape-shifting in relation to external context changes that I need to absorb because I'm the default parent. And of course, I want to love and be there for my children. But still, it is jarring from a context perspective. So there's a lot of nuance here. And I believe it's really important to talk about this because otherwise we can have a lot of resentment and frustration building up. And especially if we keep on saying to ourselves, you shouldn't feel like this, you should be grateful, you shouldn't be complaining, then all of that sort of stuff comes out sideways. If we're not processing our own emotional flow, it comes out in other ways. So I'll tell you about something that happened, I don't know, maybe like a couple of weeks ago. There was, I have to drive my kids to school. It's too far to walk. And we go on this drive, and thankfully it's a quick little drive, and it's a pleasant, mostly journey. And recently there was like a massive amount of bottleneck, like huge traffic jams getting to where we need to go. And there's only a few ways to access where we need to go. And it involves also like a kind of complex one-way system. And there was something where they were doing some building work, and there was a massive crane that had blocked up a big road that was normally 3 lanes, and it was down to 1 lane. And actually, luckily, some parents warned us about this. And I realized, because we've been sitting in one place on this one road for 20 minutes already. And so I was like, okay, we're going to have to do something else, girls. We're going to have to, we're going to walk. So I basically parked our car really close to where we live, and we walked. And it was raining. And I had open-toe shoes. And luckily the girls, one of them had a rain jacket, and luckily there was a big umbrella in our car. So we walked, and one of my twins was very unhappy about that. But we kind of had to really just validate her. She basically low-level cried the whole way. But I was very encouraging, and I just held the umbrella, and luckily it wasn't that that rain that really bounces on the road because it's going so hard. It wasn't like that, because that would have finished us all. Anyway, so we walked there. It was kind of half an hour, 35 minutes, and we managed. And I was really proud of them, because they, we all collaborated really well, and we got there, and they were happy to have got there. And it was way better for all of us to keep moving and actually take some action, rather than just sitting in the car. But then I had to obviously go back to the car, and all the plans that I had had for that morning were kind of thrown out the water, because I was then rushing to go and do something else. And then that sort of blew up the whole morning. And I had a very outsized, disproportionate reaction. I felt really full of rage about how this had all sort of blown up everything that I planned to do. And I was ranting on the phone to my husband. And I reflected afterwards. I was like, wow, I really had a really big reaction about this issue that happened, and about how it threw up everything that I was trying to do. And I realized, and there's a part of me that then wants to go into shame and be this is not a major problem, But honoring our emotional experience is really important. So I really noticed that it was actually about the context, and how I have to constantly shift to absorb these type of things. And there's always one of these type of things that's coming along. That's just the nature of life, actually. Life is messy and involves a lot of change, and involves a lot of shift, and there's always another crane in the road, as it were. So what it came back to, was something about context. So you can plan or kind of have an idea or an intention about a day as much as you like, but when you have kiddies and you're responsible, that always gets changed. And it's the same as if someone is sick. The context totally changes about what needs to happen. And I'm deeply grateful that I can be with them, that I can have the ability to change that context. And from an identity point of view, for me, it's really discombobulating, because the reason why context is so important is because when we understand more about our context, and we kind of have some control over our context, it sends us a sign of safety. So constant context changes send our nervous system a sign of danger. So it is more tricky from a regulation point of view to be regulated. And certainly when I am better resourced, when I am not just before my period, when I have been doing a lot of good exercise, when I've had good sleep, all of those things will impact the way in which we react to context changes. If you've had a wonderful night's sleep and you did some exercise before you even took them to school, imagine that. I haven't done that. I don't do that. But if you're not hungry, I wasn't hungry that day. I'd had enough to drink. I'd had water to drink in the morning, so it was all manageable. But it's still very discombobulating because of how the context shifts. The safety signals to your nervous system are difficult to manage then. So really just hold in mind the context. And if you're the default parent, notice how you react to context changes for you. What does it feel like when your kiddies are sick? What does it feel like when there's something that happens to your journey? What does it feel like when you have to adopt or adapt constantly to what's going on? Notice that. How can you give yourself more signs of safety when there are those context shifts? I was able to kind of really talk to myself and realign with the fact that I was parenting in line with my values and that I was grateful for that. My husband listened to me rant on the phone. So that gave me some connection, which was really helpful. And the next day we did something different. So it felt like I could at least plan to manage the next day better. And then the next day after that, it went back to normal. So it was okay. But when we are working to bring more regulation into our system, so build a wider window of tolerance and be essentially less reactive, because when we've had childhood trauma, there's a lot that dysregulates us. We have to have practices. We practice a lot of the time. So that day, we all practiced, my daughters and I, we practiced being with what was there, adapting, i.e. we walked. We did really well on the walk. I really tried to savor the walk and sort of be grateful that it wasn't bouncing rain and enjoy that movement. And I think it was actually regulating for all of us that we were having that movement. And I'm sure that if that I could have been more smooth in the whole thing, in terms of my own reactions and just in terms of kind of rolling with the punches. So we're working to roll with the punches in a more easy way and in a way that's not so costly for our system in this kind of process of healing. Okay, so that's the context point. Now, this is really important to consider in your holidays, because maybe you're going to be going away from your home where you live most of the year, and you're going on a holiday, and maybe you've booked to stay in a hotel, or maybe you're going camping, or maybe you're going glamping, or maybe you've got like a mobile home or something, I don't know, or maybe you're going to go and stay in a house somewhere, rented a house or a villa or something. And all of that involves context change. And often there's so much fantasy that's projected onto holidays. We fantasize that we'll have this amazing, relaxing time. We'll get so much sleep. We'll read so many books. But that's not what happens. When you get sick on holiday, you come back more tired because you didn't sleep so well. And we take ourselves with us wherever we go. So we take our issues with us, basically. So I try and really work hard not to fantasize too much now about how things will be different on holiday, and try and really be realistic about what's going with us in terms of all our kind of existing stuff. And just to really understand how context changes just by themselves can be really discombobulating. So especially if you have got neurodivergent children, if you've got people who struggle with transitions, if you've got sensitivity, anything where you might struggle with transition, or you take time. What I talked about a couple of weeks ago about FFTs. So if your family struggle with first times, then context change and holiday can be really jarring and take time to adjust. So you might find if you're going on a 7-day holiday, that by day 5 you've adjusted. And then you have to go home. And that can just feel like sort of disappointing and annoying. But really just notice this context thing and I want you to try and use this information to be gentle and self-supporting, and also to use it with your kids. I often tell my kids context ahead of time, so that they can use that information, and they often ask me the same thing repeatedly, like the same question. And I just keep on telling them the same context information, because that helps them, that sends them a sign of safety. And that's often a balance, because you don't want to give too much information, but you'll be able to kind of guide that in your own family. Okay, so we've talked about context. Connection. So this is another really essential element of polyvagal, and this idea of sharing what is going on with us and sharing our problems. It can feel so difficult, so difficult when you have learned to be hyper independent and to think your way through a lot of issues. And this is one of the most common strategies that I see. This is a lot of what I do often, is go into my brain and try and figure things out from an intellectual point of view. And, many of us are expert project managers, and we can manage we're great in a crisis. But it often means we don't share things because we're so busy thinking over things in our heads. And I really want to invite you to just consider sharing with the adults around you. If you parent in partnership, how much are you actually sharing of your own angst, of your own ponderings of your own issues? Are you being open and honest and building that vulnerability bridge with your person? Because that can be really, really, really helpful. As I've gone deeper and deeper into my own marriage, I have shared more and more and more and more. And it's really rewarding to be seen in all your kind of vulnerability, and to just be loved and seen. And then to see, I feel so much tenderness towards my own husband as I see some of his things. And not necessarily that we need to talk about, but just to kind of really honor each other. And an adult love relationship is one of the greatest learning opportunities in terms of healing our own childhood trauma and deepening into connection with ourselves, because our person who we're in a love relationship with really gets to see us. They're our attachment figure. And if we let them, they really get to see us in a way that no one else does. And that can be such a place of healing, of tenderness, of beauty, of such joy. And so I really hope for you that you can deepen your vulnerability with your partner and share about what goes on and share the load, because particularly in moments of stress in parenting, when things feel like everything's just like an absolute shit show or something, it can be tempting to shut down, and it can also be tempting to kind of isolate. But what can be really helpful, I notice when we're having a tricky time, is to just acknowledge that to each other, to really just, I remember one of the best things was when my husband just acknowledged what a pain parenting had. He used a different word, and because he appears calmer than me, I had always thought he didn't find it kind of complicated or difficult. I hadn't always thought that, because he does also have a reaction to things, but he seemed more sanguine than I did, or less kind of impacted. And he just made this comment, and it made me feel so much empathy for him, but also just so joined up in the journey. And just that kind of acknowledgement and that kind of joint support for each other really can improve things, because really our families can be a place of such beauty and such love and such healing. And, there's still difficulty that goes on. But if we can be joined up in the difficulty and kind of making loving choices so that we can turn up as lovingly as we can, if the adults can really support each other, then no matter what's going on in terms of any challenges, it makes it so much easier, and it really lightens the load to share about things. Okay. And then lastly, one of the other key elements I want to talk about is choice. Now, this is something that is just such an important thing. Sometimes I think it gets misconstrued in parenting, where parents give children too much choice about things that are way too big to give children choices about. So you are the parent. You are the one who needs to be in control of what's going on, in control of what you can. You can't obviously control a lot of things, but you are the leader in your family. You are the authority. You don't outsource big decisions to your children. If you want to give them like a little choice around dinner, you might want to say, which kind of plate do you want? Or this one, or do you want to have carrots or cucumber? But don't give them big choices. The child needs to feel properly contained, and that the adult has got everything managed and contained. That you can give them, I always give this example about if they're having a tricky time. We don't have this issue as much now, but if we used to have issues getting them into the bath, then I would always give them a different transport mode. Do you want to walk like an elephant with a trunk? Or do you want to spider crawl, like a big spider? And then what happens is, if they're having a bit of a meltdown or they're shouting a bit, is they pause and they think. So their frontal cortex becomes active as they think, do I want to be a spider or do I want to be an elephant? And then they love that choice, and then you can both be a spider and you can have some play. So that type of choice is really helpful, because the outcome is still you need to get in the bath. So you're providing that firm containment and this is what's happening, but I can give you these different routes to go there. So consider that for when you're, if you're going to be on holiday. consider how you can give small, manageable choices where you already know what the outcome needs to be, but you can help your child have a choice along the way. And the same goes for you. How can you give yourself some choice so that you can send more signs of safety to your nervous system? Because remember, we're talking about these elements, context, connection, and choice, because if we can manage more of those, we can give ourselves some more signs of safety, which counteracts, all the other stuff that comes in constantly to our nervous system. So, it might be, let me think, what choice would I like? Like, am I going to have a bath or a shower? Could I have an Epsom salt bath? Various different things that feel loving. Can we have choice around? And where do I want to read? Do I want to go and lie by the pool? So we're going to go on a holiday to the beach, which I'm really looking forward to. And then I will try and give myself choices when I can to kind of send myself those signs of safety, because there's a lot that is not in my control. But if I can give myself a choice, then it'll help. And you can use that between, if you parent in partnership, use that between you and your partner to give choices about, would you like to have a break now? Would you like to have a break then? Because you can then go into a negotiation place where you can collaborate rather than fight with each other about who's going to have a break. And so just to give this, like for you, throughout this time when you're going to have more time with your children, keep on thinking about choice for all of you. And don't offer your children choices that are really going to make life much harder for you. Like, keep those choices something that is actually manageable and deliverable and small. You want to right size the size of the choice relative to your child. They don't have responsibility for big decisions. They can choose the color of their cup, their plate, small things. And don't set siblings up to choose against each other, because that's going to bring you a whole other world of problems. And just keep on. So the points about the default parent and the context of motherhood are much broader than holiday time, but keep on noticing in your own parenthood, motherhood journey, how your context has changed, and how, if you're the default parent, notice also how your context constantly shifts because of what's going on. And talk about that, like bring that to your partner's attention. This is another one of those things that I think is a really important part of the mental load or the emotional load, this kind of constant shape-shifting and readjusting, and talk about that so you can get support. My husband normally takes our kids to school on a Friday because he works from home one day a week. And then last week, he was not working from home because he was going to go and do a presentation somewhere. And so I said to him on Thursday, I was like, you have to take him to school on Thursday. I need like a break from all this. I need like to just have a morning where I've got a little bit more control about what's going on. And so he did that, and then I did them on Friday. And so you like notice from the context point of view, notice where you might need support, notice how you feel talking about it. And try and ask what you might need so that you can feel more kind of more settled in your nervous system. Okay, and I'm wishing you a wonderful July and August, and we'll be back in September. I'm really excited. I've got some like giants from the trauma field on the podcast coming in autumn, and I'm really excited. And I'm also thinking about doing a Grow Yourself Up live event in London sometime in the autumn. And I'd love to know, like a sort of somewhere in London kind of event. I'd love to know what sort of things you might like to talk about or hear about there, because that can be something which is more unscripted or more maybe things I haven't talked about so much here, like sibling relationships or more family patterns or things. And you can ask me questions. And so email me if you got any ideas that you'd like to talk about, and sign up for my newsletter, because that's probably where I'll talk about it. Okay, so I'm wishing you a very joyful summer. I'm taking a recording break and looking forward to being back with you in September. Okay. take really good care, and I hope you get some moments of joy. I hope that, I know lots of the world is in winter, actually in South Africa they're in winter, but I hope you get some sunlight, that it's not too cold if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, and that you can really deepen your own connection, your own self-connection, and focus on how you can support yourself with these things: context, connection, and choice. Okay, I'm sending you so much love. Take really good care.